You're listening to the NVus Alien Podcast with your host, Heather Woodward, an award-winning psychic, supernatural author, and lover of all things true crime. On this show, we're going to deep dive into topics that don't usually see the light of day. The spooky, the weird, the macabre, the paranormal, and of course, aliens. Sit back, grab a cup of tea, and let's get on with the show.
My name is Melinda Greer. I'm a retired pediatrician. I practiced for 24 years as a board-certified pediatrician, mostly in tribal medicine with the Choctaw Nation and the Cherokee Nation. And I started late in life in medical school, so I only practiced for 24 years. But before that, I was a medical technologist, so I was well-versed in science and consider myself rational and logical and scientific. But at the same time, I had a lifelong encounters with various aspects of the paranormal, just anomalous experiences, noetic experiences, just really strange things happen, just punctuated throughout my life. And it would shake me up and make me reevaluate reality and things like that. Over the years, I had more and more experiences. And then later on, just a few years back, I had a person, Ray Hernandez, call me a super experiencer. So I've kind of looked into that idea of a super experiencer, which is a person that's had multiple different types of anomalous experiences throughout their life. I fit the criteria. I've had more than 5 different types of anomalous experiences and I've encountered them over my lifetime throughout my life. That's me in a nutshell. Just a lot of weird things happening. Bigfoot encounters or Sasquatch, whatever you want to call him. Seen UFOs, multiple different types. I've had missing time, had encounters with non-human intelligence, and just a really strange life.
So you've had near-death experiences.
The one when I was 5, I'm not sure that I would have died, but I believed that I was going to die. And so you could have what's called a near-death-like experience, and it can have the components of a near-death experience. I was sick enough probably to die, but I don't know that I would have died. But the one as an adult that I had in 2013, that one I have documented evidence that I had no pulse, with telemetry from the CVICU that I was in. So.
And what happened? Like, how was the experience?
So the one when I was 5, the circumstance was that I was probably septic, which means you have bacteria growing in your bloodstream. And I had cellulitis of my arm after an abscesses in my arm. I'm looking back at this from my standpoint as a pediatrician and just my memory of what my arm looked like and how I felt, and judging that I had these things. But I had been bitten by a cat, our pet cat, and I was holding him and carrying him and trying to open a big, heavy patio door, and I was only 5, so I squished him a little bit, and he had arthritis, and so he lashed out and bit me, and over the next few days, my arm became very infected, and for whatever reason, my parents didn't seem to realize how sick I was and didn't take me to seek medical attention at all. My mother just put me to bed when I had a high fever one night. She gave me something for fever and put me to bed. And I remember thinking I was going to die. And I was raised in the Christian community, and I was taught this little song, "Now I lay me down to sleep," that sort of thing. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. And I remember singing that song and just really believing it and feeling it for the first time, that I was going to die and I wanted to go to heaven. So I'd heard enough about hell as a child to know I didn't want to go there. At some point during the night, I left my body and I went to this really wonderful place. It was just, I didn't understand it at the time because I was too young and I'd never been exposed to any pictures of the universe or galaxies or solar systems or planets or anything like that. I'd never seen any of that. My parents' church didn't believe in television at the time, and they didn't believe in movies. And so I'd never seen anything like that, and I hadn't started school yet. If I had seen any pictures of galaxies or anything like that, they were in black and white. They weren't color. And this was full living color. So I was in like the blackness of space, and I remember ringed planets and moons and solar systems and galaxies, and then like clusters of galaxies and things like that. And I also saw how they were all interconnected by energies. And I was able to see energies that I couldn't see as a human being. I remember I didn't have a body. I was like just consciousness and a cluster of energy. And I could sense in all directions at once, and everything was received, just surround sensory input. It's really awesome. And I was surrounded by this comforting being that comforted me and just had this all pervading love just emanating from it, just unconditional love. And it was every positive emotion you can imagine, joy, bliss, everything. It was just a wonderful experience. It used to make me cry to talk about it, but I've talked about it enough. I've kind of gotten past that. But it's just really emotional to remember it. And anyway, this wonderful being comforted me and took care of me and showed me the universe. And at some point I was put back in my body and I came back to consciousness, and I was outraged and angry, and I pitched a fit in my bed and cried and sobbed, and I just wanted to be back in that wonderful place with that wonderful being, and I didn't want to be on earth, and I was very mad about being put back in that situation. So it really changed me as a child. It set me on a different trajectory for my life, I think. I'd been raised in a Christian home and just wholly believed everything my parents believed and that I'd been taught. And it changed that because I had experienced unconditional love, and I wasn't finding it in the church, in the church's teachings. I just didn't find that same sense of unconditional love and peace and everything. There was just so much condemnation and, I don't know, fire and brimstone and pulpit pounding. And it was a scary experience for me as a child to go to church sometimes. So I didn't enjoy it. And as I got older, I just got to the point where I wouldn't go, and they couldn't physically make me. They couldn't physically pick me up and make me go. I was that adamant about it. But I was a good kid in every other way. So they just, once I was old enough to be on my own and stay at home, they just let me stay at home. It really changed probably how I perceived religion for sure, but also how I perceived other things. I always had that yardstick that I held things to as to what was good and what was beneficial and that sort of thing.
Did you ever experience that same entity again in your life?
The near-death experience I had as an adult was that same unconditional love, but it was in a different framework. So I don't know. In my judgment, because of my experiences, I believe that there is a God or source or creator or goddess or whatever you want to call it. I think it's meaningless to ascribe a word to it. There's that beautiful, wonderful being out there that created us and is the manifest universe, manifest and unmanifest universe all in one, and is all things. And I think we're a subset of that. And I think that there's other subsets that are greater than us. And so maybe I was experiencing some aspect of that higher aspect of being. I don't know. But as an adult, the circumstance there was I was 55 years old. This was May 27th, 2013. And I'd been sick for a while, kind of sick where you're not sick enough to not go to work, especially when you're a doctor and you're taught to go to work no matter what, unless you're dying. And so I would still go to work, but I had weird symptoms. I had some mild chest pain just to the right of my sternum. I had a cough that was non-productive. And I had unexplained fevers and what's called night sweats, where you just soak through the sheets, soak through your hair, and you just wake up soaking, dripping wet. I was concerned that I had tuberculosis, and I got worked up for that and many times, and they were always negative. So they didn't know what was wrong with me, but I was able to continue working. I wore a mask and things like that just because we didn't know, but I wasn't sick enough not to work. One day, after about a month of that, I'd lost about 20 pounds. So something was definitely off and wrong. And I just felt a lot worse that day. I'd worked all week in the clinic, and then I'd worked that weekend on call at the hospital. So 7 days in a row. And I was at the end of my reserves, and I was exhausted. And so I went to the ER to get a chest x-ray. It showed what they thought was a pneumonia in the center of my chest. And then it showed a little nodule in my upper right lung that was concerning. They put me on antibiotics, and I was sent home, and I was still on call. But on the way home, I called a friend who's an adult medicine practitioner and was an internist. And she told me to turn around, go back and get a CAT scan of my chest. So I went back and talked to the supervising person in the ER and got a CAT scan on my chest. And they came in and they were looking very grim and kind of scared. And gave me a whole bunch of medicine that kind of zonked me, and because my blood pressure was doing erratic things. And they told me that I had a dissecting aortic aneurysm, which means that the aorta coming out of the heart is about to explode. I told them I didn't think so, because that's supposed to be the worst pain of your life, and I was having chest discomfort, but I wouldn't call it severe pain. But they insisted that I be calm and just lay there and not move. And they called a medical helicopter and put me in it and sent me to Tulsa. And I remember I was so drunk on the medications they had given me. I was so out of it that I remember trying to sit up in the helicopter and see the pretty lights going by as we were entering Tulsa, and that they were trying to calm me down and get me to lay down because they were scared I was going to die right there on the gurney. Long story short, I got there and they did some additional testing and decided that I didn't have a dissecting aortic aneurysm, but they didn't know what was wrong. There was something going on around my heart. I'd actually signed the consent form to have my chest cracked open to have open heart surgery and aortic graft replacement. But when I went to the OR, they did what's called a transesophageal echocardiogram, where they put a probe down your esophagus while you're intubated, and they look at the heart from that aspect right next to it using that probe, and it didn't show a dissecting aortic aneurysm. I woke up the next morning with a very sore throat and was told that they needed to do additional testing, and my nurse had me in a wheelchair, and I was being wheeled down through a very long underground tunnel under a road trying to go to a building across the street. And she was all by herself, and it's a very remote area. There was telemetry to document what was going on. I still had a radial art line in my wrist, and so it was documenting my heart and my blood pressure and everything, and sending that back to the telemetry unit so they could see it. We were almost to the elevator to go up to the other building, and I started losing consciousness and told her that I was losing my hearing and my vision, and I needed to get on the floor because I was about to pass out. And I started doing that, and the last thing I remember was her grabbing my hair and my gown and yanking me back up and back into the wheelchair, and that's the last thing I remembered on that side. What happened next was I zoomed out of my body, and I went into this just very rapidly. I don't remember any tunnel. I don't remember any dearly departeds. I don't remember any spiritual beings. I don't remember anything like that. I just remember zooming straight to this brilliant white light, and just rejoining a group of beings that I had been a part of since the beginning of my existence. And it was a great reunion. It was wonderful. I was able to, it's hard to explain because the best terms to use are those that involve computers, downloads and uploads. So I was able to download my entire life as Melinda Greer and just dump it into this great database. And it was such a relief to just shrug out of that existence and resume what I felt was my true existence and just forget about all that. I didn't think about anything. I didn't think about my husband. I didn't think about my pets. I never had children, so I didn't have to worry about that. I just divested myself of it and went on to rejoin my group. And I remember there's no time there, but yet there's timelessness. And I was there for like eons, it seemed like. But you're outside of physical time, so it's hard to explain. But we did a lot of things there as a group. We communicated telepathically. Everything was mind to mind. There was no ability to lie or dissemble, or everything was totally there. You knew everything that the other person was thinking, and we were separate beings, but we functioned as a group, even though we were individuals, and we did things. I remember going to other physical places and inserting ourselves into a physicality of some sort and doing tasks were necessary, and then coming back to that brilliant white light. Now, I should talk about the light, because the light was just not just light, but it was all this all-pervading love. And it surrounded everything, and it was just brilliant, and everything was light and love. It was just those two things, light and love. And so it was just wonderful to be there. And in that light and love, I had a sense of there was a greater source of that light and love, or what was creating the light and love was off at a distance, and I wanted to be there where that was at, whether you call it God, creator, source, whatever. there was a sense that there was something else out there. And that was the goal, to be back united with that. At some point, this probably sounds disjointed and weird, but at some point, the group decided that I needed to return to the physical form. And I have to say that not all the group had been in physical form. Not all the group had chosen to do the earth. And it was considered a very difficult task to do. So I wasn't required to do it, but the group felt that I should do it, and I wasn't going to go against what the group wanted. So I chose to come back. And anyway, I remember withdrawing from the group and being a sense of being pulled from behind and resuming binocular vision, whereas before I'd been fully surround sensory input from all sides, just like the one when I was a child. It was very much the same there in the white light, just sensory abilities all around. But as I pulled away from the group, I was pulled out of the light and back into darkness, and I could see them from a distance, and they looked like brilliant stars. But what was really strange about them is that there were only two colors of these brilliant stars in the white light, and that was purple and green. And if you know anything about astronomy, you know that there aren't purple and green stars, to my knowledge. There's reds and blues and yellows and things like that, but not purple and green. So that was really strange. I was pulled away from them, and then I entered this different, like a transitional phase where I was just pure consciousness. I had no context at all. I didn't have the context of my grip. I didn't have the context of the earth life and the memories. I was just pure consciousness, just floating out in this darkness. And all of a sudden, at a distance, I saw something. And so I floated over to it and stared at it. And I was, like I said, back to having binocular vision, just seeing straight in front of me, that sort of thing. I'm not sure if I had a body or not. I really don't remember that. But I floated over this thing and I tried to make sense of it, and it made no sense to me. But I was able to draw on this database of knowledge to try to make sense of it. And so I rapidly processed what it was and came to the conclusion that it was a living being and all the different connotations of what a living being is. And then what I was looking at was a face, and that what those two things were eyes. And this was very rapidly done, but I had to go sift through a tremendous amount of knowledge to garner what this thing was. Finally, once I realized they were eyes, then I started realizing that they were green, and I then understood what colors were. And I started focusing on the eyes and the face, and I realized that the thing looked like it was suffering. And what suffering was. When I realized it was suffering, I felt pity for it, but I also felt like I didn't want to be a part of it. It was an ick factor with pity. You're separate from something you pity. But the more I sat there and stared at it, the more I felt the sense of compassion. And once I felt the compassion, then it's like I turned and flipped 180 degrees and just got sucked into the body. So, what I was essentially looking at was my own body. I didn't recognize it because I was so divorced from being physically human. And I had to go through all that process to regain all that knowledge. And then I was just sucked into the body once I felt compassion for it. So anyway, I then regained consciousness in the CV ICU where I'd been brought by my nurse. She'd actually made it back to the elevators, keeping me in the wheelchair while I was having severe seizures before I flatlined. And even though I'd had severe seizures, which usually you don't wake up from severe seizures immediately able to process information, you're usually pretty confused. But I was immediately lucid and processing information and even critiquing the CVICU team, what they were doing, because I've been in codes before and they're usually crazy and chaotic and pandemonium, and that's what it was. I remember opening my eyes and I still didn't have my peripheral vision back, so I just had tunnel vision and hearing the room and hearing people talking, and I could sense them. It was weird. I could sense their energies and could feel whether they were young, old, and what their emotional status was. It was really strange. It didn't last very long that I could sense that about people about me, but when I first came back, I could sense that. They asked me if I had a history of epilepsy, and I said no, and there was some young kid trying to fumble his way up underneath my gown, trying to get defibrillator pads on me, and he said, "Do I still need to put these on her?" And I remember thinking, dude, your patient just died. It was weird. And as soon as I said that, your patient just died, I didn't say it out loud, but I said it in my head. And as soon as I thought that, this emotion just washed over me, and I realized, and I had all those memories of the other place that I had been. And I just started yelling at them and crying and just berating them for bringing me back there. And I think they were pretty astonished that, number one, that I was that lucid, and number two, that I was angry for them having resuscitated me. It was a profound experience that really changed me. And like my first one as a child, it changed the trajectory of my life somewhat. I'm much less materialistic. I'm just a very different person now, I think, than I was then.
Did it bring you more into the paranormal or the esoteric? People call it different things, but did it make you want to study that more?
I'd already begun studying that, I think, because of the first near-death experiences when I was 5. When I was in my 40s, I had started looking into metaphysical leanings because I'd lost attachment to any kind of spiritual or religious attachment. And so I was looking for something. And so I started studying metaphysics and looking into that and meditation and things like that. So I was already there, but it just really reinforced things that there is something beyond us, that exists beyond us, that we're eternal, and that this physical life is just a step along the way. It's not the end all and be all of our existence. It's just a process that we're going through that isn't the real us. I don't know. Every day I wake up, I want to be back at that wonderful place. It was truly wonderful, and I can't wait to go back there someday again.
Do you think it was a spaceship, or do you think you were like, because I've heard of this before. I've interviewed some other experiencers before, not NDE, but actual UFO experiencers, and they have said things very similar about the group of people, the telepathy, the group kind of hive mind thing going on. So it's fascinating to me that you experience it in the context of a near-death experience versus a UFO situation.
I don't know if you're familiar with Ray Hernandez, but he has what he calls the consciousness modalities. And his theory is that all of these are different means that a consciousness greater than ourselves is trying to communicate to us and trying to wake us up and help us to realize that there's something outside our consensual reality and our paradigms that we have built and been trained to believe that there's something outside there, and it's trying to reach out to us and help us understand that there's a greater consciousness out there. I think it's something to do with that. I think that's why there's similarities between the two, because there are similarities. I don't remember seeing a UFO. I don't remember any of that. I just remember the light and the love and a sense of just profound wisdom being there.
I've done CE5 before with some groups, and the light and love that you're talking about, one of the people that I work with extensively, he always talks about that. This sense of the light and the love. It's this very elusive feeling that you only experience when you're there. But about this phenomenon, okay, because you're a super experiencer, so you've had experiences across the board. So you've had UFO experiences, Sasquatch, probably other paranormal experiences, correct?
Yes. Out-of-body experiences, poltergeist, ghost.
All of it.
Yeah. And not a whole lot. It's not like I'm seeing this stuff every day. It's not like that. I've seen 5 ghosts. After my near-death experience as an adult at work, I saw on 5 occasions full-body apparitions that I actually spoke to on a couple occasions and stepped out of. One of them, I tried to get out of her way, and just things like that. I just can't explain it. Just to see something that looks as real as you and I, and then it just disappears. It's just mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's a very strange experience. I've had similar experiences. That's why I'm so fascinated by you, is because I didn't know there was a name for somebody that has had multiple experiences across a lifetime.
There's actually a website, and if there's other people out there that are also super experiencers, and I think that there really are a lot more super experiencers than people realize, because once you're approached by the phenomena, it can approach you in many different ways. There's a website called superexperiencer.org, and there's actually a survey that they have on the website that you can take, and they're trying to get a sense for just how many people are super experiencers and to provide a support system for experiencers and super experiencers. And they're doing it in a scientific way. They have people on there like the board of advisors. I'm a super experiencer on the board of advisors, and Chris Bledsoe is a super experiencer on the board of advisors. But most of the board of advisors is made up of PhDs in various academic realms, like Gary Nolan, Jeffrey Mishlove, Kathleen Martin's on there. There's just a lot of people on there that are in the field of consciousness studies and UFOs and things like that.
I'll go ahead and put the link in the show notes to make sure people take the survey and go through it. My experiences have been all over the place. I know people try to stay in their lanes. There's paranormal people, there's UFO people, there's the Sasquatch people. And for a while there, nobody talked to anybody. And I'm like, what happens if you are in all of it? What happens if you've had experiences through all of them? What happens if you've had a near-death experience? I just thought that was like being a psychic medium. I thought that was just par for the course.
And it's very isolating because you can be in a group of people that are Bigfoot enthusiasts, and you start talking about your UFO experiences or your near-death experience, and they just tune you out and think you're crazy. So even in a group of people that are used to being ostracized and used to having skepticism thrown at them, they're likely to treat you that way because it's just too much to have had all those experiences. It's really hard to come out of that closet and admit to it.
Yeah, it's funny to me because being in this field for so long, you would think somebody who is searching for a cryptid in the middle of the forest may be more mindful of people that have had UFO experiences because they do tend to be hand in hand a lot of times. When you see the Sasquatch, you're probably going to see a UFO because they do tend to stay in the same areas. Has that been your experience?
No, when I saw the Bigfoot, it was just a Bigfoot experience. And that was on 3 occasions. When I saw the UFOs, it was just UFOs. I've never seen an orb like what people talk about orbs. I've never seen one of those, but they were always isolated, but they're in the same area of Southeast Oklahoma, the Ouachita Mountains. Most of my experiences of Sasquatch and UFOs were down there. Not all of them, but most of them.
Yeah, they seem to be in the same areas. I do notice that. If you start looking at the region and start looking at stories and start talking to people, there's going to be UFO experiencers, and then there's going to be Sasquatch experiencers, and then you're going to have the crossover. But then also what I'm finding too with the phenomenon is that when you start looking at those patterns, then there's going to be stories of the white lady, or there's going to be the stories of the hitchhiker that gets into your car and then disappears. I'm just wondering, have you noticed that this phenomenon has a pattern?
For me, it hasn't necessarily had a pattern. It's been very sporadic, and just when I think I come to terms with something else comes along and I have to come to terms with it. It's made me do a lot of research. It just makes you a lifelong searcher for others like yourself and trying to get some explanations. I just hope before I pass out of this life that I have an explanation, at least to the UFO phenomenon, more of an idea of what's going on there, whether it's interdimensional or physical aliens from other planets, that sort of thing. Just exactly what's going on there. I hope to have some answers.
Through your research and just through your experiences, what do you believe?
I like the idea that there's a greater consciousness and that reality is not what we think it is, and that it's more of a virtual reality. This is an experience that we're having that's not the ultimate reality. We think of our reality on the earthly plane as being everything that there is, but I suspect it's just a very small drop in the bucket of true experiences out there. I like Ray Hernandez's idea of consciousness modalities. That makes sense that there's a consciousness out there trying to reach out to us and doing it in different ways, whatever is most appropriate to us. I guess I'm just a slow learner, and that's why it had to reach out to me in so many different ways because I wasn't getting it. But that's what makes more sense to me. I really resonate with that idea.
So do you feel that all of the experiences you have had are all the same consciousness?
That there's some type of consciousness. It's almost a trickster type of personality. There's nothing malicious to anything that's happened to me, really. But there's this trickster aspect to it that just boggles the mind. I really don't know. I don't have any answers. I just speculate, and that makes as much sense to me as anything else, is that there's a greater consciousness out there trying to reach out to us and trying to shake us up and rattle our cage and help us to understand that we're existing in a reality that may not be the ultimate one.
The trickster aspect of it is the it is my Achilles heel. I don't quite understand it or know what to do with it, but I know that anytime I have an experience, it is going to show up in my life in some way, shape, or form. A lot of it is through synchronicity. And then they will either go somewhere or they will go nowhere. And I never know. But I know it's the trickster aspect. When it goes nowhere, I'm like, oh, okay, you were just trying to see if I was paying attention. That's fun. Have you had a lot of encounters with the trickster aspect of it?
I just get that sense through much of it because it just comes out of nowhere, just totally unexpected. Just when you think you're trying to get a grip on life and what's going on, then it shows up again. And it's just that, I don't know. I can't explain it, but there's just a sense of prankstership behind it sometimes that it's just so unexpected, just comes out of nowhere and it just shakes you up, makes you think.
It does. It puts you into that place of contemplation, and maybe that's what it's designed to do. Tell me about your Bigfoot experiences. I'm so curious.
So the first one was just a sighting. I was going northbound. I was south of McAllister, Oklahoma on the Indian Nation Turnpike, and I was going northbound up to I-40. At the time, I lived in northwest Oklahoma in the Woodward area, and I was heading back there after signing a contract with the Choctaw Nation to start working for them in southeast Oklahoma. So anyway, I was heading up and I was on the edge. I realized later I was on the edge of the Ouachita Mountains, just right where they ended. And I was, like I said, north in the northbound lane, and I came up over this slow rise, like a small hill. And as I came up over it, there, just across the southbound lane from me, looking like they were just inside of a cattle fence, a barbed wire fence. They were just inside of it, like they had just stepped over it. I didn't see them step over it, but they were just on the other side of it, like they had just gone over it. And they were big enough to have stepped over it. Let's put it that way. Anyway, one was like a head taller than the other, and they were head to toe hair, and they were a reddish blonde color, and they were really pretty. Their hair was ripply in the sun. It rippled. My first thought was I was seeing two people in Chewbacca outfits, but they weren't Chewbacca-ish at all. They weren't that matted, ratty looking hair at all. They were smooth and silky and pretty. And it was also over 100 degrees that day, according to my car thermometer. And there's no way that anybody would be out in the middle of nowhere in a pasture in a Chewbacca outfit, let alone two of them. It wasn't a ghillie suit. I could tell that. I was close enough. It wasn't a ghillie suit. And besides, it wasn't hunting season. And again, it was too hot for anything like that. So I watched them as I got abreast of them. I slowed way down, as I got abreast of them. I'm looking at them from behind, and they're striding away through the field, and I can see their muscles of their back. They're really powerful muscles just rippling in their back as they're striding away. They were moving quite rapidly, but they weren't running. And like I said, they were head to toe hair, and they didn't have a neck. The head kind of sloped into the shoulders, and they were very broad and wide. And like I said, one was a head taller than the other, but they were exact same color. The hair was exact same color. Anyway, they strided away from me into a forest, and I knew that if I turned around, I wouldn't be able to see them, and there was no way to really turn around on that particular turnpike. And it was illegal anyways. I saw no need to go back because there's no way. I didn't know what I'd seen. I didn't at that time have any kind of paradigm in my head that allowed Bigfoot to be in Oklahoma. I didn't know what I was seeing. I was just thinking maybe I'd seen into another dimension, or I'd seen into the past or the future, or I was trying to scramble for any kind of paradigm to put them in, but I thought maybe I'd hallucinated. I just didn't know. I didn't feel like I was seeing things, but it was just too real. I had to go home and think about that. That was in 2001. And then in 2002, for reasons I won't go into, I was in the Ouachita Mountains in a remote area of a wilderness area, and I'd had my second flat tire of the day, let's put it that way. And I was where no camera should be in this remote trail that it was supposed to be a road, but it ended up being a trail that was all rutted. And anyway, it took out my second tire of the day. So I had no way of getting out other than walking out. And it was a very hot summer day. It was early September 2002. It was actually Labor Day, Monday. And I just remember no food, no water, walking for 10 miles. And finally, I'd gotten through to a deputy sheriff's office. This was a time when you had flip phones. And I don't know how old you are. You probably don't remember a flip phone, but we had flip phones and we had what was called roaming and cold dropping. So roaming is where it just roams from one cell tower to another, and cold dropping is where if it thinks you've used too much of the bandwidth, it'll drop you and let somebody else have some of the bandwidth. So I was having a real hard time getting through to anyone. I had 0 bars, I had 0 reception. You had to be in line of sight with a cell phone tower to get reception, so I had 0 reception. And so I did get through one time to family, but they couldn't hear me. I could hear them, but they couldn't hear me. So it was just worthless. And so after walking for 10 miles along this mountain ridge, it had become dark about 9 o'clock, and I broke off a big stick off of a tree and was feeling my way in the dark with this stick because the road was so rutted. And by that time I was down to 1 flip-flop. I'd lost a flip-flop, and I was, like I said, no food, no water. I was in pretty bad shape. So about 2 a.m. in the morning, after walking 10 miles, part of it in the dark, I finally reached a fork in the road, and all I had was starlight to see by. So it's really hard to see by starlight, but when you're in a remote area, your eyes really get accustomed to the dark, and I could tell the difference where the road forked in the sand. So anyway, I knew where I was at. I finally got through to, I had cell phone reception at that point, so I got through to a deputy sheriff's office because I'd gotten through to various different ranger stations and deputy sheriff and different sheriff's offices over the region, police stations and things like that. And so they'd finally put together the pieces of the picture of where I was and what the circumstances were, because every time I'd get through to someone, the call would drop or roam, or I'd lose reception, or my cell phone battery was going dead, or it was just a bad time. So anyway, I sat down in the sand and I was just waiting for them to come find me because they knew where I was at, and kind of lay back and was just resting. And next thing I know, I regained consciousness, and there's something behind me, and it's bent over me, and it's sniffing my face very loudly, and it's just in my face, and there's this worst stench of my life. I thought it was its breath at first, but when I jumped up, it wasn't its breath. It's like the whole area was pervaded by this stench. And so I jumped to my feet and I came up. I was thinking it was like a mountain lion or a bear or a wild hog or something like that, something big up there that we had in the area. And so I came up and I was immediately in the fight mode of fight or flight. I couldn't run away because it was dark and it was treacherous terrain. So anyway, I came to my feet fighting, and I remember screaming and stomping and yelling and trying to hit this thing with my stick, and it ran off. And as it ran up the hill, there's a gentle hill in front of me. And as it went up, I could hear it running on 2 feet. And that was really confusing to me because I didn't understand what was going on. It didn't sound 4-footed, it sounded 2-footed. And so anyway, it ran up the hill, and I stood there and just tried to make sense of it. And it was huge. It was blotting out the stars, and it was huge. And it starts coming back towards me. And as it got closer and closer, I realized I'm looking way up at this thing, and it had to be 10 to 12 feet tall. It was just huge. And it had the outline, it was blocking out the stars in the outline of a human being. Like it had shoulders and a head and things like that. And I couldn't make out any details, but I could see that it was humanoid in form. But it was just so tall, it just made no sense. And anyway, when it got too close, I just did the same thing I'd done before. I just tried to hit it with my stick and yelled at it and chased it off. And this happened over and over again, where it would try to sneak up on me from different directions. And I just stood my ground and waited to hear with my hearing which direction it was coming from, because it would come through the woods. And it was over the next 30 minutes, it would try to sneak up on me many times, just over and over again. It seemed like it just went on for an eternity. And each time I would drive it away using my stick. I never actually hit it, and I never let it get that close, but each time it would run off when I would yell and stomp and try to hit it. At some point, I'd reached just the end of my rope. I was just exhausted. I was perplexed. I didn't understand what was going on. I was confused. And it'd been such a bad day, and I was so exhausted and overwhelmed and everything lack of water, lack of food. I wasn't in great shape. And so I just decided I was dead and I was just going to leave. And so I turned my back on it and started feeling my way in the dark with my stick and just walking down this trail and just trying to get away from it. And I heard it following me for a while, and I fully expected it to jump on me at any moment and just tear me up. And I just kept going. And after a while, I didn't hear it anymore. And anyway, they said I walked another 2 miles after that. So I walked 12 miles total. And I finally found a place to sit down. The moon had come up by that time. And so I had a little bit of light. And so I found a place to sit down and wait for them. And I was so glad to hear their sirens whooping in the forest, knowing that they were close by and they were going to find me. When they got there, the 2 deputy sheriffs got there. They hadn't brought any water, and I was very thirsty. So they said that there was Forest Service guys coming up behind them, and I could hear them coming up in their truck, and that they might have water. So as the Forest Service guys are walking towards us, the deputy sheriffs are asking me why I had left that Y in the road, the fork in the road. And so I told him that there was something horrible. There was this monster I was babbling. There was this horrible, stinky monster that was sneaking up on me and trying to get me, and I had to leave. And I didn't know what it was. It wasn't a bear because it didn't act like a bear. And we don't have grizzly bears in Oklahoma, which is the only thing that could have been that big. I'm babbling about this, and the Forest Service guys hear me, and they said, that was Bigfoot. And I just immediately said, we don't have Bigfoot in Oklahoma. And they said, yes, we do. We see them all the time. And so then it just rushed over me what I'd seen the year before, the 2 beings out in the pasture, and then what I'd experienced that night. And I just realized I'd had an encounter with Bigfoot. So then it made sense. I had a paradigm to stick my experience in. So it made sense to me then what had happened. And then in 2007, so that was 2002. And then in 2007, I was walking. I'd just gotten to where I was comfortable being back in the forest on my own and walking in remote areas on my own again. And I was walking down this gravel road, heading back to the truck. And I was walking along a creek that was in flood stage. And so it was very loud. And I was kicking rocks. And so I'm astonished that I got as close as I did to this thing with me kicking rocks and making noise doing that. And I was looking at my feet kicking the rocks, and I wasn't paying attention. And then I heard something over by the truck, and I glanced up. And there's this very tall, what I first thought was a human being, looking into the back of the truck. It's on the other side of the truck, and all I can see is a head and shoulders, and it's looking into the truck. And so I'm indignant, thinking, well, who are you? What are you doing here? And why are you looking at our truck? I was about to say something, and then I realized how tall he was and how big he was and how strange he looked. And then something banged to my right. So I think there was a second one. There was an old metal building to my left. Something banged on it. And so I glanced there for just a second, and then I heard him running, the guy by the truck running. And so I looked in front of me, and there running out across the road was a Bigfoot. And it was head to toe hair. It was dark hair this time. It wasn't the reddish blonde hair. It was dark hair. And unlike the other ones I had seen, he wasn't that bulky. He was more skinny, but he was super tall. I wonder if it was an adolescent. I don't know. He just didn't seem that bulky and big and wide. He seemed more slender and tall. But apparently there's differences in Bigfoots, is what I've heard, or what I've been told. But anyway, he ran across the road in a way no human can run. The knees were all different. The gait was totally wrong for a human being. And he ran super fast. And then he went up the embankment, which was about 3 to 4 feet tall. And he went into the forest, and he went past a tree. And he was like 40 feet away from me, 40, 50 feet away from me. So I got a good look at him. And he went past this tree, and he's at a dead run going past this tree. And then he never came out the other side. The tree blocked him from my view, and then he never came running out the other side behind the tree. So I can't explain that. You can't just stop and drop on a dime. And even if he dropped to the ground at that point, I would have been able to see him because I was that close. But it was just dead silence and just nothing. Nothing to see, nothing to hear, nothing. So that's the only thing that makes me think that there's something to this different dimensions or ability to enter different dimensions as far as Sasquatch is concerned, is that seeing him disappear like that. I just can't explain that. That's the last time I saw him was 2007. Nothing since then.
You think they're interdimensional or transdimensional?
I don't know. I just know that I can't explain how it could just disappear like that. I just can't explain it. And when I started hearing people speculate that they were transdimensional, then it just takes you back there and makes you wonder. It would make sense of what I experienced. Let's put it that way.
So why do you think that you haven't had any experiences since then?
I had other experiences, but not involving Sasquatch. And my last UFO experience was like 2012. So I can't explain why. I've had other experiences. I had my near-death experience, and I still see subtle energies that I've been seeing since I was in my 40s. I still see those. But as far as having big experiences of UFOs and Bigfoot, that's kind of not been what I've been seeing lately. It's like I've had them, I believe them, I believe they exist, and so the phenomenon has passed me on.
Do you think maybe it's like I don't know how to say it, but like a initiation or something like that, where you need to see that in order to move on to the next phase of it? Like you're in some kind of mystical school. I don't know how else to explain it.
Once I finally get over the fear of it and have researched it, like I have all kinds of books on Sasquatch. Once I get over the fear of it and research it and I'm ready to actually have an encounter and not be afraid, then it's not necessary anymore.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's just kind of, you're like, over it. Don't need to see that anymore. Let's move on to the next thing. Or maybe it's opened up your paradigm so that you're able to get to the next phase where that's really what the end goal is. Because I don't know, seeing something like that, would that not just really change your reality?
It makes me speculate. If they're flesh and blood, then how have we missed a huge hominid remnant population that's able to reproduce and live? Granted, they're nocturnal and granted, they're very elusive, but how have we missed that and not had proof of it over time?
It seems that's something that a lot of people tell me too, is once you think you kind of have an idea of what it is, then it changes. So you never quite have an answer. You're always looking
Waiting for the next one. Yeah, and waiting for the next.
Yeah.
Yeah, the last anomalous things I really had happening along in those lines were the seeing the ghost after my near-death experience, and that persisted until about 2018. We have poltergeist activity at our house sometimes, but it's very sporadic, and we've had disembodied voices at our house and things like that, but nothing that scares me anymore. A few years ago, I was actually struck. I was actually hit in bed. I was asleep or falling asleep, and it was a forceful blow on my backside. And that's the last thing that's happened. That was in 2023, I think. And what was strange was right after that, my heart was pounding, and yet I fell asleep. And I've had that happen a lot over the years. Something will happen, and my heart will just be pounding, and I'm just in full panic mode, wondering what's going on, and then I fall asleep. And I can't explain that. It's very strange that can occur, to be in fight or flight mode and just frozen in fear, and yet you just wake up the next morning with the memory of the occurrence, but just totally baffled how you could just suddenly just fall asleep.
So you wake up with heart palpitations and you're like, oh, okay. And then go right to bed? Go back?
No. Okay, so back in 2012, we were going through relocation from Southeast Oklahoma to Northeast Oklahoma. So we're moving from the Tallahena area to the Tahlequah area. And my husband was keeping our old home in the Southeast Oklahoma going, and I had rented an apartment. It was like a brand new duplex condo sort of thing. It had never been occupied before, and had rented that. And anyway, I'm living there for about 6 months. And during that time, at night, I would have these visitors. And I hate to say that I was such a coward that I never opened my eyes to see what I was dealing with, but they would come many nights, often, for weeks in a row. And they would come in, and I would start hearing rustling in the room, and then I would hear rustling on both sides of the bed, and then I would feel the bed being bumped, and then I would feel them poking me, and they would actually poke my legs and my back and just poke me, whatever was available to be poked, they would poke me, and just it was just terrifying for me. I never would open my eyes. I never wanted to see what they looked like, but it was just terrifying. And I would be sitting there with my heart pounding, and then I'd wake up the next morning with the memory. And this had happened night after night. And one night I was just exhausted. I was on call at the hospital a lot. It had just been a really bad time, and I wasn't sleeping well because of these experiences. I was just exhausted, and I said, look, I don't know who you are, what you want, but if you're here and you're just here to teach me something and you're beneficent, then just do what you need to do and let me sleep. And if you're evil, then just be gone. I need to sleep. And I just remember saying that out loud. And next thing I know, I'm just taken out of my body through my head. My consciousness is removed from my body through the top of my head. And I remember the swirling motes of light and being a part of these swirling motes of light that were just swirling upwards in a kind of a vortex type pattern, and going somewhere and doing something. And then I was reinserted into my body. And then I was told telepathically that they needed to do the same thing again to reinforce the lesson. So I was again removed from my body, same swirling, same pattern, went somewhere else, and then was reinserted to my body. And then I woke up the next morning with memories of the whole thing. And after that, they never visited me again. They never came back. But it was the same thing, that heart pounding, just something happened during the night, heart pounding, and yet just instant sleep and that sort of thing. How can that happen? Except that some external agency is making you fall asleep when you're terrified.
It's forcing you to remember it, but not remember it. Yeah. How interesting. And have you said that stopped after a while?
That stopped as soon as I had that experience of going out of my body twice. I no longer had them visiting me. I still sometimes hear rustling in the dark, but nothing that gets my attention or makes me scared. I just don't have a fear of it anymore.
Yeah, after a while, you just go, okay, this is what it is. You gotta move
Yeah.
on. It becomes part of your life. And then you tell other people about it, and they're like, what? That's not normal. You're like, sure it is.
Yeah.
It's been happening all my life.
Yeah.
So what are you doing now? What is your mode of research, or are you just doing talking, speaking?
I didn't do much of anything. One of the things I came back with from my near-death experience, as far as a memory of what my mission was to do on Earth, or my reason for coming back, was to talk about my near-death experiences with others, and to talk about not just that, but also all the other weird things in my life and what it's like to have these experiences. So I don't seek them out. I don't seek out speaking engagements, but if somebody approaches me and asks me to do it, I feel impelled to do it because of that sense of mission, so to speak. So if somebody reaches out to me, then I do it, but I don't seek it out at all on my own.
So you're just called when you're called. It's like waiting for the invitation. You're just like, if I need to be here, I will be.
I'm an introvert, so it's really hard for me to talk. This is easy because this is audio only, but being in front of a group of people like I was at the Ozark Mountains UFO conference, that was very tough. It was terrifying for me.
But you got your story out there in a huge way.
Yeah, I think it went well.
And I think you were meant to be there. And I think sharing your story is really important because there are so many experiencers out there that don't get to talk about it. You know what I mean?
It's a scary thing to be an experiencer, and it's also a scary thing to think that you're going to meet skepticism and ridicule. As human beings, we don't like to have people ridicule us by any means. And so it's hard for people that are experiencers to tell their stories. And I think the more of us that tell our stories, the more that we realize that we're not alone and that there's many of us out there. And then at some point, they're going to have to realize that this is a human phenomenon that's not psychiatric in nature, that well-grounded people in all walks of life are having these experiences, and that we need to get a handle on it and figure out what exactly is going on and do a little more scientific research and that sort of thing. Everything I can say is purely anecdotal. I have no proof except for the near-death experience where my heart stopped. I have proof of that. But everything else is just purely anecdotal. But I always say a person can testify on the witness stand and help get a person locked up for life or even receive the death penalty. But yet a person that testifies as to their experience of the paranormal, they just get shunned or ignored or ostracized. And that's just not right. We need to start listening to each other. Yes, there are psychiatric cases out there where people perceive things that probably aren't real, but there's a lot of people out there that are fully normal functioning people in society that have had these experiences and just feel like they can't talk about it. And we need to change that.
Yeah, I'm always surprised at how many people don't want to talk about it and then they start talking about it because you're just listening. That happened to me at the conference. Somebody started talking an experience that they had, and I didn't blink or question it. I just accepted it. He just kept going for about 20 minutes. And I was like,
Right.
oh, you really need to get that off your chest. To me, it sounds like a normal experience because I talk to people all the time on the podcast. So I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. But to him, it was like sitting on his chest for
Right.
so long. It was like he just needed someone to talk about it. And I'm like,
Yes.
yeah, okay. I'll be that space for you. But it's funny though, because of the life of me, I can't remember what he said. But I think I just needed there to be in the space for him to share the experience and to normalize it. So I'm glad that you're doing this work and I'm glad you're out there. If people want to get a hold of you and tell about your experiences or they want to share with you or invite you someplace, how do they get a hold of you?
I've started giving out my personal email, which is Melinda Greer 999@yahoo.com. And they can reach me that way.
Perfect. It was great talking to you and thank you so much for this interview.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the NVus Alien Podcast. For show notes, go to the website www.nvusalien.com. All of the reference materials and mentions in this episode are linked there. If you want more witchy, paranormal, and fringe content, please subscribe to my Substack. Just search Heather Ashera, that's Heather Ashera, or check the link in the show notes. And as always, see you on the flip side.